Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark McLaughlin, and I'm the founder and former medical director of Princeton Brain and Spine Care. I'm a neurosurgeon practicing in the Princeton, New Jersey area, and I've been in practice for about 20 years. And I'm really excited about this conversation today that I'm going to have with Ashley about sports psychology and how it relates to performance. So I'm going to just go around the circle. We've got two other folks on the line here that are going to participate in this conversation, and so I'm going to hand it over to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ashley Zultanky. I'm a clinical psychologist at Behavior Therapy Associates in Somerset, New Jersey. My work primarily is focused on lifespan psychology, child through adult, focusing specifically on sport performance, also other mental health concerns. And I work with individuals in approximately 35 states across the country. And I'm super excited to be able to have this conversation with you all this morning. So I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. Over to Patrick.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm First Lieutenant Patrick McLaughlin. I'm an infantry officer in the Marine Corps, currently serving as executive officer for a company. And I'm excited to be here and have the opportunity to share my perspective today on sports psychology and the influence of that in the military setting. Before we begin, I do want to say that my views and opinions do not reflect the views and opinions of the United States Marine Corps or U.S. government. They're based on my experiences serving in the Marine Corps.
Excellent. And I want to thank Brian Greer, who's videotaping this and has been providing us with outstanding AV support for many years. So I guess I would start with, I think we should go around the horn a little bit and talk about what our jobs are, so the audience can kind of understand a little bit about what we do on a day-to-day basis. And then we can get into some questions about, what are the things that get in the way of our performance and what are the things that we can work on to improve our performance and to leverage what we know to be more productive. So just for starters, for me, I've been a practicing neurosurgeon for a little over 20 years. Most people don't know this, but neurosurgeons do probably 80% of their practice is spine surgery, and 20% of it's intracranial surgery. So I do intracranial surgery in terms of trauma to remove blood clots and to take care of traumatic conditions associated with the brain. I also treat a disorder called trigeminal neuralgia, which is a severe facial pain syndrome, and I also provide support for patients that have tumors and other structural compressions of the brain and spine. And I spend about 50% of my time seeing patients in the office, evaluating them, and about 50% of the time in the operating room, which is, definitely an area that requires a high level of performance. Although I also feel that the office requires a similar level of performance in terms of being attentive to hearing, your patient's complaints and making sure that, I'm making proper decisions in terms of whether they need neurosurgical care or whether they need to be dispatched to another type of medicine. So on a day-to-day basis, I take care of patients with neck and back diseases and cranial illnesses. And in my free time, I coach youth wrestling, which is another very interesting laboratory for performance. So I'll hand it over to you, Ashley. Tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis.
So day-to-day, I primarily work with individual therapy patients, ranging from anxiety to depression, autism spectrum disorder, sport performance concerns, and then just a number of adjustment life disorder issues, transferring into colleges, graduating high school, various life movements that people typically have. Part of that also, I work with a couple of different school districts in different settings. So I do consultation in an athletic department for sport performance. I also do neuropsychological assessments and psychoeducational assessments. So I get to work with individuals who are experiencing complications in school or in the work setting related to ADHD, again, maybe anxiety, depression, specific learning disabilities, things like that. So that takes up the majority of my work day. And then in my spare time, I'm an equestrian. And so that's one of my areas of sports psychology that I actually work with a few equestrian athletes as well, which is really cool. And then, so my horse and I compete in dressage. So that's been me trying to bring back my sport glory from, high school and college into my adult life.
Excellent. 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 Thank you. Patrick, tell us what you do on a day-to-day basis. You're muted right now.
Yep. So each day on a day-to-day basis, my current job is to ensure that all the Marines within my company are ready to deploy. We're focused on our upcoming deployment, everything from mental preparation, making sure that everyone receives the proper training through both academic classes, practical hands-on application where we're actually out there doing things, as well as making sure that everybody's staying up to date on medical readiness, making sure that their bodies are prepared to deploy, and really just making sure that everything in the company is running as smoothly as possible, so that we're ready whenever we are called on eventually to execute whatever mission we might have coming.
Nice. And what do you like to do in your spare time?
In my spare time, I spend a lot of time in the gym. Typically, after I get off work, I'll head over to the gym and get my own workouts in. And also, I like to read a lot. I've been trying to expand my portfolio on reading recently.
Excellent. So I want this to be an organic conversation about performance, and I want to start light. Ashley, I want to pick your brain a little bit because had a chance to play golf yesterday, and what an experience golf is for the mind. So Ashley, let's just imagine that I'm a weekend warrior golfer, which I'm probably even less than a weekend, maybe a monthly golfer. But I actually played quite well yesterday, and I was hitting the ball beautifully off the tee, and I was combining some secondary shots, and my putting game was terrible. It was absolutely horrible. But tell me, like, as a amateur golfer, what are the sorts of things that you do to work with people to get more consistent? Because obviously those good shots are in us every time, but I just can't seem to produce them.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I work on with my golfers is focusing on correct shots, right? So once you are pretty proficient in terms of technique, then what happens is we maybe start to let other things kind of float in and impact us a little bit. So we might notice that you're getting distracted, or you're focusing on, if I make this putt and I do it just right, then I'll have a birdie, or if I make this, then I'm having a double bogey, and today's going to be a rough day. And so sometimes those things tend to distract us, and we kind of lose our focus. And so what I like to come back to the basics on is some grounding exercises. And so what that might look like, something as simple as feeling your feet in your shoes, right? Just wiggling your toes, noticing the feet, noticing the grass under your feet. And from there, we bring it up the body. So as you become more mindful, as you become more grounded, then you start to notice how the club feels in your hand. And one thing I do with one of my amateur golfers is, hey, as much as you can hold that club 5 minutes, 10 minutes throughout a week, then you really become more comfortable with that sensation of feeling the club in your hand, getting set up in your putting stance, and then everything else, it alleviates a lot of the pressure, and then you can focus on making that correct swing or that correct putt. And so what I have them practice is saying some sort of very short mantra or a word or two that allows you to really hone in. So it might be something as simple as let go, right? So letting go of that tension and that stress, or something that kind of cues that shot for them. So what I would recommend is noticing where your shot might break down, and what it is that really allows you to feel more grounded and mindful in your approach. And that's going to really elevate your game a little bit, because it's those little nuances, especially with something precise like golf, that we start to make those mistakes, and then it becomes sort of a snowball effect. So looking at, how can we get you to be in this more grounded space, and then, kind of honing in on the technique that you already have.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So that's great. That's helpful because, even just yesterday, I was getting ready to get a swing and I had my favorite club and my favorite hole, and I was getting ready to swing. And then I looked up and Patrick said, "Watch out, there's a cart in front of us." Some joker from another hole was on our fairway. He'd whacked the ball way off and he disrupted my concentration. It made me angry. And then I got ready to hit and I hit a 10-yard, flub because of the distraction that came to it. And I think if I had gone back to my feet and thinking about, okay, I got my feet, and really taken a step away from the ball and taken a few moments, I probably would have played better. And I kind of let the distraction get into my head. It rattled around and and then I hit the flub and I was like, you see, I knew I'd hit a flub because the guy distracted me, and that's what caused me to do this whole thing. So
absolutely.
I
also like to say to go back to the values of why do we do this, right? We're not getting paid to do these things. We're not professionals. This is something that we pay to do in our spare time. So why put yourself in that position of being stressed out, right? You're stressed to have fun. And so really connecting to this idea of, I love to do this. It is relaxing. It is enjoyable. That's going to remind you to take a step back a little bit and say, okay, sometimes bad things happen. Sometimes a shot goes into the tree or the sand or whatever. And I'm just going to laugh it off, right? I'm going to see the humor in it. I'm going to approach this a little more curiously without that tension and pressure of, I have to do this perfectly. I have to make this correct. And then focusing on those fundamentals, that sort of pairing is really, really helpful for people to not get in their head so much and then get really angry and, kind of lose the enjoyment of the day. You get to have your son on the golf course, and, if you were angry and like, oh, let's just get this over with, as opposed to, I made a mistake. All right, let's just, enjoy the day and we'll, get to chat about it later. Then you're going to have a much more enjoyable time for sure.
Well, you used a great word that I think is really important, especially to with golf, and that's the the word perfect. And Patrick, if you want to increase your portfolio of reading, you should add a book called "Golf Is Not a Game of Perfect" by Bob Rotella, who's one of the fathers of sports psychology. I think that would be a good one to read. I've read it years ago, and I probably need to read it again too. Let's step it up a little bit. Patrick, you're on the riflery range, or at least that's what I was taught to call it, the riflery range, and you're trying to get one of your men to fire more accurately. What are the kinds of things that you've learned on something that requires even more precision than golf? What are the techniques that you use, and can you share with us some insights on how to get somebody to shoot more accurately, which especially when their life may be depending on it and somebody's shooting back at them too?
Yeah, definitely. Something that we do once a year as Marines is we go to the riflery range, as some call it, and we shoot out to 500 yards. And the interesting thing is, even with the weapon systems that we use at that range, if you shoot the same exact place every single time using a machine, the bullets will not land in the same place simply because of the outside factors. And they can land within an area up to almost 12 inches wide. And once a year, you go and you shoot. And when you go up on board for promotion, how well you shoot can determine if you're getting promoted or not sometimes. So it's a very high stress scenario for a lot of Marines when they go to the rifle range and they're shooting. So the main thing that we always talk about is your preparation beforehand, making sure that you do the proper things the week before. In fact, there's what's called grass week, which is where you basically practice going through the motions of what you're going to do the following week. Everything from actually having your weapon system and aiming down the sights at the different distances and pulling the trigger without rounds to moving all the way into when you do the moving drills, when you're as close as 25 meters and you're actually shooting while you're moving between different yard lines. Also, something that's very helpful that we do is we talk about the fundamentals. We always talk about a couple of fundamentals, and the most important one that we talk about is breath control. Not only is it very important to control your breath to actually physically have the gun in the same location when you pull the trigger each time, but it's also something that really calms us. When you focus in on your breath, kind of like how you guys were talking before about focusing in on feeling the ground and then feeling that come up through your legs, and how that ends up actually making your entire stroke a better stroke. When you focus on your breath, it calms you down, and it just lets the rest of the entire sequence of events that need to happen flow very easily. Obviously, this is all when no one's shooting back. So we do ramp it up during our exercises when we're doing ranges and we need to move very rapidly and make decisions very quickly in situations that we quite frankly don't have all the information in. And the main thing is it takes practice. You're never going to be able to make the right decision 100% of the time. So what the important thing is making the decision when you have as much information as possible, and then moving with that decision forward and making sure that you actually have the relationship with the people around you for them to follow you and to execute whatever plan you've come up with.
That's fascinating that you actually have a machine on the range that fires and it doesn't even hit the bullseye every time. It's good to know, because again, I think it points out truly that even though you can do everything right, you can make every single step right in an operation or in a golf swing or on a horse. You still have other variables. I guess the military always says the enemy gets a vote too. I guess the horse gets a vote in equestrian, Ashley. Your comment about did you call it grass week? I think, is that what you called it?
Yeah, that's correct. Grass week.
I had an interesting experience recently where I had the last operation of the day. I knew I had to, when I finished, I had something going on immediately after, and I wasn't going to have a lot of time to do the dictation. And so with the electronic medical record systems, the way they are, I can actually go in and do like a pre-report and just kind of pend it. I click pend and it sits there in suspended animation until I, finish the operation and I can do the completion of the operative report. And so what I did was, before this last operation, I dictated exactly what I imagined the operation to be, every single step all along the way. And then I just clicked pended, and then I went and did the operation. And that operation went so smoothly. I couldn't believe it. Now, I'm a seasoned surgeon and most operations go smoothly for me. But this experience of actually dictating exactly what I imagined and then doing it, it really optimized that experience. And it's something that I made a mental note and I said, you know what, there's something to this. I think I need to do this more. And so I've begun doing that more. And I just find, the operation goes a little more smoothly. And, I'm already performing at, 99.9% of what I want, but now I want 99.99% of what I want. And that was something I learned very recently. Reminds me of that grass week experience. Ashley, what are your thoughts?
It's actually really cool. So Patrick, I competed on my college rifle team. We won NCAAs my sophomore year. So the precision sport rifle in and of itself is quite near and dear to my heart. And my sports psychologist, when I was in college, actually made us do that. He would have us go through our pre-shot routine and we would visualize the entire experience of shooting a rifle match. The good part of that is if you do it the way that you are capable of, right? And so visualizing it going smoothly, making sure that you're running through everything that you need to, then in practice, it goes really well. If you're anxious, you have difficulties with sport performance or performance in general, you might visualize all of the bumps in the road, right? Making the mistakes, missing something, not doing it the way that you should be doing it. And then in practice, you make all of the mistakes that you visualized. And so having it written down, I love that idea because that's that's documented, that's in black and white. And so you can really read through it before you go in and say, okay, here's my plan step by step. There really is no room for error. And so when you visualize it as you're doing it, then you're following the steps that have already been predetermined. And there's no, oh, made a mistake here, I have to go back, or oops, I did this wrong. So, if it really eliminates some of that anxiety and uncertainty of performing, which is really, really cool. It's definitely interesting.
I remember listening to an interview by Yo-Yo Ma, and the interviewer said, "Well, what do you do when you have a mistake when you're performing?" And he said, "Well, I make a mistake in every performance, and I welcome the first mistake because then I can get back to playing what I know I play, and it makes it interesting for me." So that was a profound statement for me. All right, so Ashley, we've been talking about performance and pretty optimal conditions, but sometimes I'll be ready to do that operation, and as I'm getting ready to go to the operating room, I get a call from the emergency room, and it's a patient that I took care of 2 days ago, who now is coming in with a complication from a surgery, and I'm upset about it. I'm sad because I wanted that patient to get better, and now they're not better, and maybe they're even worse. And it's distracting me because I've got 10 minutes to get to the operating room, but I got to run down and go see that person who maybe even had the same operation that I'm about to do, and they're experiencing a complication, which is something that happens in medicine. Give me some pointers. How can I calm my mind when something that I'm about to do, I'm very, very acutely aware of the things that can go wrong when I'm about to do it.
Right. So one thing I love when I speak with especially surgeons is that they are so good at compartmentalizing for that moment, right? When you're working on a case, you are able to turn that off, right? And that takes decades of practice and hours in the OR to really hone that in. And so for someone maybe in med school or just recently graduating, that experience isn't there yet. And so, if you're feeling distracted, or if you're noticing, I'm really frustrated about this case, and now I have to go in and deal with this other case, and it's similar, and there's a lot of uncertainty here. Coming back to this idea of what can I control in this moment? Right. And so if you have your pre-surgical routine, I know we discussed that a few weeks ago, you have your pre-surgical routine, really relying on the steps that you can take to make sure that everything you're doing is consistent and everything that you're doing is sort of well thought out and pre-planned, so that when you go into the OR, you walk in with this headspace of, I can control what I can control. There are other factors, as we've been discussing, that sometimes come into play, and we don't always have the ability to foresee them. And in that moment, I can notice my something as silly as my feet in my shoes, and I can progress and move forward, knowing that I'm capable of connecting to what I'm able to do. So what that might look like, for someone who has, less experience than you do, who's kind of new into the field, that might be practicing some of these things, right? Modeling that for yourself when you're not in the OR, when you're not in that situation. What is it like to visualize? And I know in the military, sometimes the psychologists that military members work with in terms of performance, they request that you visualize things going smoothly and then visualize things going very, very wrong. And okay, how do we plan for this and how do we adapt? And having that flexibility, that psychological flexibility, is so important to kind of shift and continue in that direction that you're capable of attaining.
Good point. Patrick, how about you? You're getting ready to go on deployment. You've got a big day the next day. You've got a significant performance that needs to be done, whether it's on the rifle range or it's somewhere else. And you get a terrible distraction. Either you get a head cold and you didn't get any sleep, or you only had 3 hours to get and you didn't even sleep well that 3 hours. You're tired. You're somebody's been in your grill about something. What do you tell your men, and how do you function doing something highly complex, and demanding with suboptimal, let's say, physical conditions?
Yeah, so Ashley mentioned compartmentalization, and I think that that's a really big part in what we do. Something else that we do is we try to minimize the necessity for it when we go into longer term things, such as a 6-month deployment. So things that we do is we focus on our Marines getting not only their physical and mental readiness up, but also their family readiness. Because a lot of things that happen when you're out deployed, they can be rooted back to different issues that Marines have at home. So the main focus, the weeks leading up to deployment, is the Marines' families, whether that's their wife and kids or their mom and dad, and giving them the opportunity to solve whatever problems they may have on the homestead prior to us actually going out there. But in terms of actually facing those, something that we talk to our Marines a lot about is that bad news doesn't get better with time. So the most important thing to do is actually address those issues that you're having head on. And if you need help, don't be afraid to ask for help, because there's a lot of people out there that are a lot smarter than each and every single one of us in different areas. And it's all about identifying who those people are and leaning on them, because quite frankly, a shared burden is easier to carry than by yourself. So focusing on actually minimizing the compartmentalization, because yes, it's very effective to accomplish short-term tasks, such as a surgery or a athletic competition. But when we're looking at something longer term, like a 6-month long deployment, a 9-month long deployment, those issues do tend to start bubbling up and seeping through the cracks. So really focusing on trying to face those issues head on and provide the support to everybody for them to actually be able to be in the best place prior to executing a deployment.
Great point. We have a similar statement in surgery, and that is, little problems unattended to become big problems. So similar along the same line, but I really like that. Bad news doesn't get better with time. I'm gonna steal that from you.
So I'm not sure if I can take credit for that one, but
go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry, one of the really interesting things that I do, I'm going to kind of swing you guys over here for a second. I hope that you can see this clearly. I can always move you closer, but this is something I work with basically every clinical patient that I have. And so this is called the ACT matrix. And so this is based on acceptance and commitment therapy, or acceptance and commitment training. And so really the cool thing here is we focus on our values, right? What's in your heart? Who's important to you? What's important to you? What's meaningful? But on this left side over here, these are all of the thoughts, feelings, emotions, memories, things that get in the way. The technical term we use is stinking thinking. That's kind of the joking term that psychologists use for this section. And what do we do when those negative thoughts and feelings impact us negatively? So that's like shutting down, engaging in poor behaviors, risky behaviors, all of those kinds of things, to get some relief from caring too much and being hurt. And so that is really what Patrick is talking about. That compartmentalization works in something acute, right? If I have a long jumper and I need them to make that jump, I'm going to tell them, hey, don't worry about, your biology test tomorrow. We're going to focus on what's going on here and now. But in the military, when you're away for 6 months, when you're away for several years, when you're in situations that a lot of the control is removed, you have control over what you're doing, but outside factors, really take that into consideration. Really coming back to this section over here, where what are the actions that we can engage in that are connected so deeply to our values and that make what we're doing feel meaningful and validated, and how can we live within or move toward this idea of vitality within our lives. And so for something like the military, where really your sole purpose while you're in the military is protecting and serving our country, making sure that people are safe, completing missions safely, getting everybody home, that's such an important value, right? And so other things that are outside of our control, you know, they're frustrating, they're upsetting, we want to resist them. And if we can do the things that we need to really enhance our value, or especially as a unit, the core value of the unit, that really helps everyone kind of focus on what it is that they need to do and move forward in a way that they can be successful short-term and long-term.
Patrick, do you have anything you want to comment? I do have a comment for you on that.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
So I found that compartmentalization worked for me for a long time. And I think it's a very useful technique, particularly in people who are, who are learning their skill sets, people who are, that haven't strengthened their mental resiliency. I think it's very important. I found for me, I've stepped kind of beyond it. I tell a story in my book about, I was about ready to go and do a very complex operation, one I hadn't done in a long time, but I had to do it because the time and situation demanded that I do it. And a number of factors were in my way, and I was really not feeling great mojo about doing this operation. And then on top of it, I got word that my father had been given a terminal diagnosis of leukemia. And I immediately thought, oh gosh, I got to cancel this. My mind is not ready for it. And it was really hard for me to walk into the hospital. But as I walked in, I kind of flipped it around. I had a couple of events happen with me. I saw the patient with his family, and I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, what are they going to, how are they going to deal with this cancellation? I can't cancel it on them. They've been waiting for me all day. I'm their only hope right now. And for me, I just through just feeling the sadness that I had, I would say, instead of compartmentalizing it, I actually integrated it. And I said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to cancel this operation. I'm going to dedicate this operation to my father. And I'm going to make it the best operation I've ever done. I'm going to make it a monument to him, because that's what he would want. And when I did that, it really opened my mind to the new concept of really what I was feeling was fear. And what I turned towards was love. I turned towards love of my father and love of my patient and love of what I do. And when I got rid of that fear, I was able to perform amazingly well. And I think it's an advanced technique. But for me, I felt most integrated with carrying the sadness of my father's illness into the operating room in a way that I could integrate it with who I was. And so it was a profound experience for me. And it really opened my eyes. And I'm not advocating, just before you're about to do your high school state championship pole vault to think about the sad things that could be distracting you. But I do think that, there's something to be said about it. I one of the books I've read, Sebastian Junger talks about this in War. It's a wonderful book. Another book, Patrick, if you haven't read, highly recommend, is that, these acts of heroism that soldiers perform, they perform out of love of the men to their right and their left. It's not like, oh, they don't describe it as being courageous. They describe it as being, well, if I didn't do it, who was going to do it? And my guys needed to do it. And I'm speaking as an amateur, Patrick. I'm not in the military. What are your thoughts about that? I'm a bystander, but from what I've read, that's, I mean, you live and work with heroes, people who do incredible acts of heroism day in, day out. What do they, when you ask them about their acts, what do they say? How did they get to do those acts? How did they perform those feats?
Yeah, actually, I think that I can draw a lot of parallels to the story you told. More or less, you felt fear, and rather than succumbing to that fear, you kind of exploited it, and you used it as your motivation to succeed in that moment. And the main thing about being in the Marine Corps is knowing your men and being able to actually find what motivates each individual, because quite frankly, different people are motivated by very different things. Some people might be motivated by their loved ones. Some people might even be motivated by their love for country, or some people for some other reason. And actually knowing what motivates each individual helps you be able to exploit their strengths when you need them most. I think an interesting parallel between your job and my job is a suboptimal performance could lead to loss of life. And we have a saying in the Marine Corps that as Marines, we deal in human capital. And more or less, if we're not performing at our optimal level at the most crucial moment, then people are going to die. So it's very high stakes and high risk, high reward what we do day to day. And like you said, the people that commit or that do these heroic acts and save so many lives, all they talk about is the people that they have to their left and right. They talk about how they do it for their brothers in arms. They do it for their families back home. And when they get back to the arms room at the end of the day, back to the armory, and they turn in their weapon systems and they're back with their brothers and sisters and they tell stories about what they've done, it's always for the people around them. And that's why people keep doing those things. That's why people stay in the military. It's almost always because of the people to your left and right.
Speechless. Ashley, we've talked about some pretty heavy stuff and some pretty interesting perspectives of sports psychology. This is a gigantic T-bone steak that we're serving up to our listeners. Let's maybe bring it back home. How can we apply some of these concepts to our day-to-day life? And then I think this is just the beginning. We need to have more conversations about this. What are your thoughts about, on a day-to-day basis, how can we take some of these pearls that Patrick's talked about, that you've talked about, that I've talked about, and get 10% better for next week and for next month until we have another conversation about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think really the most important thing, and you've both touched on it, especially in the story of taking the news about your father and really channeling that into your surgery immediately after, the present moment awareness. And that's what's so important. When people feel anxious, when people feel distracted or frustrated about something, they tend to shut down a little bit, right? Whereas when you're open to the experience, when you're willing to not hold on to it aggressively, but I frequently use the example of allowing a caterpillar to sit on the palm of your hand. And you don't want to hold it tightly because then you crush the caterpillar. Instead, you hold it with an open palm, right? And so what that does is it gives you more freedom. If we can hold our emotions in an open way and not try to control them by squeezing them tightly and pushing them down and hiding from them, then we can allow ourselves to let those go, right? And that's where that present moment awareness, I use the word compartmentalization, but really focusing on what's happening in this moment right now. What can we control? And letting go of what you can't, and letting go of the emotions that you're trying to hold on to, just allowing them to exist, not trying to exert control over them. So if someone is, they have a presentation at work or they're recovering from an injury, noticing those feelings, noticing those physical difficulties or those emotional, mental difficulties, and acknowledging them, not trying to hide from them or run from them, but letting them go and letting them exist while also focusing more on the values, the things that are important to you, the way that you can live meaningfully instead. And that's really, day to day, how we can optimize our existence.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but this has been a very special 40 minutes and something that I really enjoyed and have learned from. So I hope that you listeners will get something out of this as well. And I think this is a conversation to be continued. Love to we have so many other topics to talk about, but I think this was a really great start. And Ashley and Patrick, I thank you so much for your time. And Brian, thank you for supporting us by producing this. Thanks, everybody, and we'll plan to continue this conversation in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you all. This was really, really incredible opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for the chance to share this conversation with you too. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope that the listeners can get something out of it as well.